So thank you, everyone. And thanks for joining the Brand Innovators Summit. My name is Tim Smith, and I manage the strategy and digital solutions team here at the Axel Agency. At the risk of dating myself, I've been in digital marketing for over 25 years. I started my career at Moda Media, which was one of the first interactive, as we refer to it then, agencies, launching some of the early brand websites and digital campaigns. My claim to fame actually was trafficking and reporting on the first ever banner ad for AT&T on the Hotwired website in 1995, if you can believe it. At the time, we were measuring the handful of impressions available on the web and the emerging CTR metric. So needless to say, a lot has changed since then. Since that time, I've worked at a social commerce startup, some leading DMPs and DSPs, a mobile attribution platform, and for the last 5 years here at Data Axle. So today I hope to share with you some guiding principles and an approach to enhance your acquisition efforts. So let's start with the landscape and what's going on. So we know in this business, it's always changing, and that's actually what makes what we do so interesting. The last 3 years has presented some unique challenges that have forever changed both consumer behavior and the digital ecosystem at large. The first one should be obvious to all of us. We call it life phasing. With the advent of remote work, people are seamlessly transitioning from their personal and professional lives within minutes. In one moment, you can be hosting a team meeting with 15 or so of your coworkers via Zoom, and the next you're taking your dog for a walk around the block before you jump back in to finish your workday. In addition, the lines are blurred between digital and our digital and physical worlds. We no longer make a distinction between our physical interactions and our virtual ones. The other thing I'd like to highlight is the fact that consumer expectations continue to increase. This has sort of always been the case, but with the advent of automation and artificial intelligence, consumers actually expect personalized interactions with the brands that they have relationships with. Where at one time personalization was deemed unsophisticated and a little bit creepy, it's now expected to deliver real value to folks. And lastly, identity issues. So although full cookie deprecation has been delayed, it is imminent, and it has already made it more difficult for us to reach prospects in a privacy-safe environment. The emergence of retail media networks and disparate ID solutions further complicate these matters. But we're seeing that brands are actually really starting to begin to realize that their first-party data is a tremendous asset that will help them mitigate some of the challenges ahead. So with that landscape, let's talk about 4 key areas that will lead to a successful program in the face of all this change. The first is audience intelligence, really understanding the whole person and the value they can bring to your organization. Secondly, a focus on being channel agnostic, truly recognizing your prospect's journey and their path to purchase. Creating brilliant experiences and leveraging the data we have to deliver these meaningful interactions. And finally, tackling attribution. It truly is achievable, although it can be incredibly daunting. It's still a critical piece to our overall puzzle. So I'll dive into audience intelligence first. So it seems pretty obvious, but to launch an effective program, you must start with the person or the person you hypothesize will respond favorably to your product or service. Given the life phasing that we discussed, it's not productive to view consumers in a one-dimensional way, but rather the whole person, considering both their personal and professional lives. Thankfully, we have a ton of robust consumer and business data to create a full picture of your prospects. For example, Michelle, who we know is both a decorating enthusiast and a young professional working at a marketing firm in Chicago, we can reach her in multiple environments on the web, including Elle Decor, given her interest in decorating, and perhaps Adweek as her role as a client service manager. But it's nice to know Michelle, but guess what? We need to find thousands and thousands of Michelles to reach our acquisition goals. So as a result, we can create a series of personas, and in this case, a tech-driven metropolitan millennial, which is a mouthful, admittedly. And each persona can have dozens of data attributes and corresponding predictive models to help us reach our Michelles at scale. Next, let's talk about being channel agnostic. So now we know who we want to reach, but where do we find them? At this point, we understand that people engage, even through our own behavior, with a dozen or so marketing channels a day across multiple devices. So this is an example of Michelle. She wakes up from an alarm on her iPhone. She quickly checks her text messages and perhaps opens TikTok to catch up on the new videos that may have been uploaded in the 8 hours she was sleeping. Her morning routine continues, and she checks CNN's 5 Things for the latest headlines via email. She fires up the Morning Toast podcast over coffee, and then she begins her workday in earnest, leveraging Teams and Outlook and other media tools. Maybe a quick game of Candy Crush between meetings. At lunch, she receives a company announcement regarding a new hire. So she visits LinkedIn to check their profile and to see if she has any mutual connections. Perhaps she visits Revolve to shop for that new dress she needs for the holidays as well. In the evening, she migrates to the couch, relaxes watching Netflix on the TV and perhaps YouTube on her laptop. So as you can see, Michelle is doing a lot in any given day. And admittedly, customer journeys are not a new concept. And honestly, they seem to be a little bit contrived and used really to sell the latest data or platform. But I assure you, this is a real life scenario. What you're seeing here is a picture of my daughter, who's a young professional currently working remotely out of her home just down the hall. I promise this is not staged, except for the dirty coffee mug I asked her to remove from her desk. So what does this mean for us? To effectively reach people, we have no choice but to be channel agnostic and engage with them on their terms. In addition, we must keep pace with all the emerging channels and technologies, and even those that are falling out of favor. So speaking of channels, let's talk a little bit about the distinction between multi-channel and omni-channel. So although the intended outcome is the same, the approach is actually quite different. Multi-channel is simply allocating budget to each channel and evaluating the respective KPIs in a vacuum, versus an omni-channel approach, which is much more of a synchronized effort with each channel playing a specific role to drive the prospect closer to the desired conversion event. For example, we might send a direct mail piece to an audience initially and then reinforce that message via social or programmatic in the coming days. I know this is easier said than done with our respective silos internally, with the email team and the website team and the programmatic team, but we really must strive for this omni-channel approach to maximize the investment we are making. Next, let's talk about our most valuable customers. So anyone in the acquisition game knows that not all acquisitions are created equal. We all have been in situations where we can drive super high volume, but that unfortunately doesn't lead to lifetime value and potentially churn. So hitting an acquisition goal is nice, but if it doesn't lead to revenue, it's really not that meaningful. In many cases, we have the opportunity to ingest existing customer data and develop lookalike models to reach our prospects with similar attributes at scale. As a result, we can optimize towards something we call CPQA, which is a cost per quality acquisition versus a CPA that will have a greater overall business impact. So let's talk a little bit about developing brilliant experiences. And this, to me, is the fun part. So assuming we have the right audience, targeting, and omni-channel approach, we need to pay it off with a brilliant experience. So as I mentioned, we can use data to deliver these messaging that are much, much more impactful. So this is one of my favorite examples. This is the Hewlett-Packard Low-On Ink series we developed. So the overall objective here was to sell ink cartridges direct to the consumer via the HP e-commerce site versus in-store or via third-party sellers like Amazon. We had some great data to work with to inform the creative, including real-time data from the printers themselves, the hardware, indicating that they were low on ink, the exact color of the low ink cartridge, the printer model, and in many cases, the name of the consumer. So this data was leveraged in every element of the creative you see here, and the ads linked directly to the specific product page where the consumer could purchase that SKU. So given the level of personalization here, you can imagine this program was performed 2.5 times better than the previous ones. So moving on to attribution. So if creative is the fun part, attribution is, in my opinion, the less fun part and can be really, really daunting, similar to this ball of yarn. But it is critical to inform investment and optimization decisions. And it's even more complex now given the market dynamics I discussed earlier. And also, in my opinion, attribution can really have a paralyzing effect on organizations. So with that, we really need to start small with a single string versus trying to tackle the ball of yarn all at once. We must start somewhere to focus on some guiding principles, of which I'll share here. Firstly, focus on business outcomes, right? So measure everything, but stay focused on the ultimate outcomes you are trying to achieve. Otherwise, you can really get wrapped around the axle. Make it personal. So align your model to specific use cases and their path to purchase. You know your prospects best, so make it real for them. Don't be afraid, which is a big one to me. Don't be afraid to make assumptions and take a leap of faith regarding the credit you give to each channel. In this situation, perfect really is the enemy of good. Demand alignment, and we see this all the time. It's really, really easy for people to poke holes in any given attribution model. However, we really must strive to address any potential naysayers and gain consensus the best you can. Another key one is get the data and close the loop. So strive to tie your marketing data to actual purchase via matchback analyses. It can be hard to do, but this really is the holy grail of attribution. And lastly, doing nothing is not an option. So the worst thing you can do is throw up your hands and operate your programs without a solid attribution model in place. Advancing. So I will leave you with 5 questions that you should ask yourself when you're launching your next program. Who are your most valuable customers? Do you know who they are? Do you know them both in their personal and professional lives? Are you using data to inform their experience? And do you have alignment internally and how you're measuring success? And lastly, are you ready for the future of customer acquisition? So with that, I'll hand it back over.